mindful as we go forward. But out of respect for time here, we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Aileen and I am the Director for the Nonprofit and Voluntary Sector here at Alberta Council. With me is my colleague Moin Yaya, who will introduce himself, but we're going to talk about Bill 38, primarily focused on the Charitable Fundraising Act, and then we'll open up to questions after. So I'm going to pass it off to Moin to handle all the legal components.
Well, thank you, Aileen. My name is Moin Yahya. I'm a lawyer here at Alberta Council, and I'm going to go over Bill 38 as it applies to the Charitable Fundraising Act. General caveat, this is meant to be a bit of an overview, not detailed legal advice. So whatever I say here, it's more for information. And if you have legal questions, you can talk to your lawyer about it, or you can consult with us as in a formal manner. The Bill 38 that was introduced in the legislature just convened is a bill introduced by the Minister of Red Tape Reduction, Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction. And the title of the bill is the Red Tape Reduction Statutes Amendment Act. And it purports to amend a variety of statutes, including the Post-Secondary Learning Act, the Boundary Surveys Act, and the Charitable Fundraising Act. And so today, I will just focus on the Charitable Fundraising Act. The bill is quite large, but thankfully for our purposes, the section dealing with the amendments to the Charitable Fundraising Act is actually quite short. Just to give a bit of a background, so we're all on the same page. I know most of you in here know this already, so I apologize if this is repetitive, but just in case somebody on the call is not completely up to speed, just give a quick background. I'll just give a bit of an overview of charities, and I'll use the term nonprofit and charity interchangeably in this presentation, even though I know that technically there are two separate things, but just for convenience, I'll use those two terms interchangeably. The three questions that usually any charity or nonprofit engages in from sort of start to operation is one, how do you legally organize? And then two, can you give tax receipts? And then number three, can you engage in fundraising? The question of how you organize is usually an easy one. Usually most charities register as a society. Some might choose to go under a nonprofit corporation. And then the question of whether you can receive donations and issue tax receipts, that's a federal matter that you deal with the CRA. You have to register with them as a charitable organization. There's a bunch of paperwork and hoops you have to go through. And if they approve you, you get the eligibility to issue tax receipts. The third question, which is the focus of today's talk, is the question of whether a charity can engage in fundraising. And the answer is yes, but in Alberta, charities that raise more than $25,000 or in gross donations or use a fundraising business as defined in the Act must be registered. And of course, there are some exceptions if you're only soliciting from your members, if you're only soliciting goods, or if you're doing a fundraiser using gambling activities, but then you have to comply with AGLCC rules. Now, the way the Charitable Fundraising Act and the regulation is set up, all registration and enforcement activities in the Act refer to the minister, and that would be the Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction. Now, obviously, it's not the minister personally who's doing any of the enforcement and registration. It's employees within the ministry. But when the Act is phrased as minister, it means anybody in the ministry has this kind of authority. And what the new amendments do, is to create a new position, I guess a dedicated position called the Director of Charitable Fundraising, Director for short, and also inspectors. Now, the previous version of the Act had the minister could hire inspectors to engage in enforcement. And so now the amendments contemplate explicitly that there will be a director of charitable fundraising, and this director now will have the authority to hire inspectors. The director basically gets placed in the place of the minister in the act. Everywhere you see the word minister, the director now replaces the minister. So the director is now given the specific responsibilities that used to lie with the minister in the previous version of the act. And I should note that the previous version of the act has basically been around for almost 20 plus years. And so this director now will be in charge of the enforcement matters, the registrations, the licensing of charities, and the licensing of fundraising businesses. The director then, who can also hire inspectors, will be now responsible for all the aspects of the sort of day-to-day operations. So I guess this act, or this amendment to the act, is a way for the minister to hive off and create a specific or a specified division within the ministry that's going to be responsible for charitable fundraising, as opposed to kind of open-ended floating within the ministry generally. So far that's basically the sort of I mean, it's a big amendment, but it's from the outside it's basically, you know, hiving off of responsibilities from the minister to this director. There is, however, one more change, which is Section 57, which deals with regulations. Section 57 of the Act says the minister can make regulations that govern a variety of aspects of the charitable fundraising process. And there's now an amendment whereby a new regulation authority or a new regulation power is added. So the minister can make regulations now, and this is new language, the red is the new language, respecting the conduct of charitable organizations and fundraising businesses when making solicitations. So that's an interesting addition, because the previous aspects of regulations, if you read the act where it talks about what the minister can do, it talks about all sorts of things that the minister can do, which would seem to me to be kind of conduct-like stuff. So this addition of conduct suggests that the ministry or the ministers may be contemplating making regulations that go beyond just these procedural aspects of fundraising and may have some other substantive implications. I'll let Eileen comment on that in a bit, but at least from sort of the legal perspective, there's clearly an additional power that has been added in terms of what kind of regulations can potentially come along. Additionally, these regulations can also adopt or incorporate a code, standard, or body of rules that relates to any matter in the regulations. In other words, the new regulations, any new regulations passed, don't have to explicitly spell out all the codes of conduct. It might refer to some other code of conduct or set of rules that relate to the aspects of fundraising. Again, right now, on kind of a blank slate, at least legally speaking. Aileen might have some other thoughts on what that means, but at least looking at it from sort of the legal lens, there's these two new additions or powers that now the minister has with respect to making regulations. And this one, by the way, is the only aspect of the amendments where minister is not replaced by director, and that's because only the minister, at least in terms of regulations, generally speaking, the minister or is the one who makes the regulations, which are, of course, are subject to confirmation by an order in council. And then if they had given the director authority, they would have to give the director authority of rulemaking. Usually that's typically the way these things are done. So that's why the minister is the one designated here. So everywhere else the minister was mentioned, it became director, except here it's still the minister making the regulations. And there's also another, one more thing, which doesn't necessarily touch on the charities themselves and their fundraising activities, but it does add some more insulation of liability to the minister and the director and the inspectors. They are now protected from acts done in good faith, which was in the old act, but also they're now protected from any neglect or default in the performance of the duty or the exercise of power in good faith, which sounds like they're getting more immunity from liability than they had before. Before it was just acts done in good faith. Now it's acts done in good faith, as well as any neglect or default in the performance of the duty, or even the exercise of the power in good faith. So I'm not sure what prompted that, if there was some concern about some aspects of the governance of charities that, or this is just some housekeeping. that the minister thought was necessary, but that's the other addition that has come into place. And then the amendments will come into force upon proclamation, as opposed to just receiving royal assent. And so what I would take out of this, based on my first read, is a couple of things. One, obviously there's this new director who's going to come in, so stay tuned. Who's this new director? How are they going to approach the fundraising, enforcements and so on and so forth? Still yet unknown. And then the more interesting aspect for us is the regulations. What are these regulations that are going to come in regarding the conduct of fundraising that go above and beyond the sort of procedural and accounting type regulations that are already in the regulations? So in terms of the substance, stay tuned for what these new regulations may contain. And I'll hand it over to Eileen to comment more from the lobby perspective.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So, I mean, as you can see, kind of the devil will be in the details, right? And so a lot of the details we're waiting for will be in the regulations. But contextually, we've seen a trend even in the last couple of weeks and through the budget documents that have been provided, a very distinct commitment to realigning funding objectives with provincial priorities. And so, for instance, last week, I think it was last week, might have been this week, I don't know, all time is a blur right now, but AGLC was just amended, will become effective April 1st, wherein now the casino funding that charities usually have access to, rather than funding the organization, is now going to be funding programs and activities that will kind of have ministerial oversight in some ways, and so it's politicized some. And then we saw in the budget, Alberta Law Foundation, they had their budget cut, but also that there's a sweeping new suite of regulations around how their grant funding can be allocated as well, wherein anything over $250,000 now needs ministerial approval too. And so we see this trend occurring where government is having more input and influence over how funds can be directed. So in terms of kind of where we stand right now and kind of opportunities for influence to try and mitigate any potential harm that could come in with this type of legislation, is you're probably going to want to start looking at trying to influence how the regulations are written. And so you're going to want to start talking to the minister and lobbying to influence that in a way that's going to support your foundation or your charitable functionality, and hopefully minimize the politicization of where these funds can be utilized. Again, we don't know the extent of anything yet, but if we can influence how the regulations are written, that'll help reduce some of that uncertainty. So that's kind of it in a nutshell for the lobby implications. I know there's a lot of questions, so we wanted to leave time for questions, but that's it in a nutshell, folks.
And you can also type the questions in the chat if you don't want to ask openly.
No questions? Everybody feels super great about everything? Anytime regulations won't come out, I would suspect in the fall, bill has to pass first. It just had second reading yesterday, I believe. So it'll pass in the next couple weeks. And then they'll probably say they'll do consultation to build the regulations. So they'll probably do that over the summer, and then they'll table them in the fall, would be my best guess. But government hasn't provided us a timeline, just tends to be the trend. Else?
Sorry, I'll just talk because I think it's easier that way. Can you hear me? Oh yeah, no, I was just curious if you had any thoughts about whether you think it's better for groups to advocate individually, or if you think it's more effective if, we kind of form together and do consultation as a team.
My 1,000,000% recommendation would be to form some kind of coalition, some kind of whatever, collaborative to bring forward similar objectives. You're gonna have more power, and you'll be more protected that way too.
Okay, absolutely, thanks.
Um, for AGLC questions, okay. Let me just pull up the exact wording from the government, so that way I'm not steering you wrong. Just give me 3 seconds here to pull it up and I'll just quote it for you. So it says, the updates shift the focus of AGLC policy to the types of activities and programming a charity can use their gaming revenue for, rather than based on their organization type. So we used to use the casino funds to fund the organization by like mission, vision, mandate types mentality. And now it's going into the granular of activities and programming. Charlene, your question about determine the granting of license based on the priorities of government. My suspicion is yes, we'll know when they release the policy manual, an updated policy manual, in April, on April 1st, I believe is when they said it would be released. They didn't, like, there were some good news stories in the AGLC update that they provided. That was on Monday, they sent out a news release about it. Some of the changes that they're proposing for AGLC are good and will be beneficial, but that is like, that one sentence is the most alarming piece of the entire thing. So, it said, yeah, that the AGLC handbook will be updated and we'll have more details then. Anybody else? I know it's not a lot of information to go off of. It's difficult when legislation is tabled because we don't have the details behind how anything's going to be executed. So the hope here was just to provide some high-level overview of what we could potentially be facing and then figure out how we can influence the regulation piece moving forward. Appears to be an additional layer of bureaucratic oversight. I would agree. It's going to be complicated to navigate, I'll say. From a red tape reduction standpoint, it does appear to be the opposite of red tape reduction. But go ahead, Wayne.
Oh, well, I'll just say, devil's in the details also who the new director is, right? So maybe, insofar as the minister had heard concerns that, it was chaotic, you didn't know who to talk to, you just had to apply to the ministry and you're dealing with employee A, employee B, maybe that's a concern. Then having one person designated the director just for these might be better in that sense. But on the other hand, if there was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If there wasn't an issue and it was going fine, yeah, maybe adding this director with its new bureaucracy and inspectors and all that might be. So I guess, that might add more bureaucratic oversight and just, paperwork. So we'll see how it gets implemented. That's going to be the test.
Part of the struggle too is that when you have somebody that's ministerial appointed, right? Like there's already how we influence those decisions and who's being appointed. Again, the whole thing will be the devil's in the details and regulations will matter here substantially. Regulations always matter, to be fair, but they're going to be hugely impactful here. You see is the motivation for these changes. I'm trying to find a way to put this professionally. In the commitment of the government over throughout all the documents, especially in the budget, and you'll see this in the ministry business plans and the fiscal plan and all that fun stuff. There is a very clear commitment to align programmatic funding to provincial priorities. So at this point, basically, everything needs to align with the Alberta recovery model, right? And so we're really focused, and we've heard ministers talk about this already, that they're trying to move away from the woke ideology, the DEI type stuff, and fund things that are more intervention based. So they're shifting away from prevention, they're moving towards intervention. They don't want to fund organizations, they want to fund people. That's their terminology. We're just completely overhauling the social, especially the social services sector right now, into a new model. And I think that's a good chunk of this. The argument in the press release that the minister had shared was that they're trying to bring us in alignment with the Consumer Protection Act, which in and of itself doesn't make any sense to me, because they're two very different things. But that was the rationale in the press release from the minister. Anybody else? Okay, we will make sure that when the regulations come out, we'll likely do something similar to this. And a briefing will be shared with folks. We'll be keeping tabs on this closely, but if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Happy to try and navigate this. There are opportunities to influence things moving forward, so capitalize on that. Build your collaboratives. Try to get on the same page with some like-minded asks, and you've got a few months. So now's the time to start planning. Yeah, it could very much. So just a message in the chat, will have huge implications for the future of the sector. This is going to have a huge implications on the entire charitable sector, honestly. And so I am eagerly awaiting the regulations myself. I'm supporting a few groups in trying to influence regulations too, so feel free to reach out. There will be some of us trying to put together a collaborative to move some suggestions forward. Mostly we're looking to mitigate harm at this point, and maintain as much control over the funds that you can have. So don't know yet. How does this affect egg societies? We won't know those kind of details until the regulations come out. Anybody else? Okay. Appreciate you spending half your lunch time with us. I'll put my email in the chat, so if anybody has any further questions outside of this and would like to get in touch, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.